Good morning. So we're at the end of the book of Malachi. When I started not the first time I preached, maybe like the second or third time, I preached on the entire book of Habakkuk. And my supervising pastor at the time was like, you don't have to do the entire book. Today's a little bit like that. You may at the end say, you didn't have to do that much of the passage altogether. You could have spread it out a bit, but hopefully it all comes together for all of us. So let's go back to where we started. In Malachi chapter 1, we encounter God's words to the people, I have always loved you. These words push through their impressions of God that emerged as a result of their experiences in exile. Experiences that had left them sensing that God had forgotten them and pushed them into the hands of their enemies. And in the midst of their disappointment and uncertainty about who God is and what God is like, God announces, I am a God of covenant. I am the God who has always loved you, and I do not change. Later in Malachi chapter 1, moving into chapter 2, we hear God's words to the people, you have shown contempt to my name by offering defiled sacrifices and both preaching and living as though I condone injustice and celebrate evil. And despite the protests from the people, God reminds them of all of the ways their disregard for God has multiplied injustice within their worshiping communities, within their neighborhoods, and within their families. And God invites them to expand their imagination from one that is centered on self and on gain and on accumulation to one that joins in God's vision for all people to experience blessing and flourishing. An invitation to move from a dull to a vivid imagination that declares who God is and what God's dream for humanity is, with a resounding reminder that God does not change. And then we found ourselves in the beginning of Malachi chapter 3, where God responds to the question, where is the God of justice? To which the answer is less about where is God and where are the people of God. And so God calls the people to be refined. He calls them to be made new so that they are good news. A story from Eden till this very moment. And even there, God seems to announce, I, the Lord, do not change. And you and I know people who really live for a God who does not change. We all know someone who really wants God not to change, but not because they want an unchanging God who insists that we are loved or that we are wanted. Instead, what they may long for, and sometimes what we may long for from an unchanging God, is that God is a stickler for the rules. What we want is a God who moves according to our personal notions of right and wrong. We want a God who should be static, who should be stagnant, and that is how we define unchangeable. Yet, here's the word, I am the Lord, I do not change. And it has the opportunity to be an invitation rather than a confirmation of condemnation. When we look back over the book of Malachi and we revisit that phrase, I have always loved you, a people called to move from a dull to a vivid imagination, those who do not simply seek out a God who is good news, but seek to be a people who are good news, we encounter a new way to understand this declaration of an unchanging God. And we come to see that an unchanging God is also a responsive God. An unchanging God is also a dynamic God, one who moves within time and within space, within a culture and within a context. This is kind of laid out in Malachi 3, verse 6 and 7, where God tells the people that the sign that they have encountered an unchanging God is that despite all of the reasons that they should be left behind and all of the ways that they've elevated sin and all of the ways that they've participated in injustice, that for all of the ways they have celebrated the rise of evil and coveted what evil has accumulated and achieved, the unchanging God is still faithful. The unchanging God is still abounding in love. The unchanging God is still with them, still calls them his own, because God remains the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's good news for those that the prophet spoke to, and that's good news for us who are here today. And right there, as God announces, I am unchanging, God then responds. God speaks to all that is not as it should be, to a people who resist and run from who God is, to a society that so easily abandons God's vision for the world and responds with this declaration: return to me. And for some who are here, that's all that's required. That's perhaps all you needed to hear today was return to me. Has God felt far? Return to me. Has fear begun to order your steps? Return to me. Have you begun to believe that God is not good, nor is God good news? Return to me. For God declares even in our day and in our moment, in our situation, I am unchanging. I am the God who has always loved you. Return to me. But what, you may wonder, am I returning to? After all, the complaints of the people in the book of Malachi are accurate. And so their descent into selfishness, their reliance on fear, their doubt and discontent, their disappointment, and their reimagining of God as not good, as not great, as not worthy, all of that can be understood. For it seems, and it appears through their lens and perhaps through some of our own, that God cannot be trusted. Rather, I can be trusted. When I can control something, that is what can be trusted. That which I can touch and feel, that can be trusted. Those that I witness rising around me, regardless of their methods, that can be trusted. That which I hold and that which I worked for, that can be trusted. The ideas and concepts that require no faith can be trusted, but God, not so much. Yet here in the midst of their questions and the midst of our own is the unchanging God who is responding to a people in flux with the invitation to return to trust. Malachi ends with this invitation echoed as God says, "You have robbed me," and invites them to trust that God is enough. "You have spoken against me," and invites them to trust that God is the God of justice, and then says the Son of Righteousness will rise, and that is an invitation to trust that God is always responsive. The first, you have robbed me. God tells the people, you have robbed me. You don't bring all of the tithes into the storehouse anymore. And what our temptation is to simply see this as a financial ultimatum. Wouldn't that be funny if I totally changed my demeanor for this one verse? Have you seen those videos where the guy says, lock the doors until the people give enough money? I don't know where that came from. So our temptation is to see this as a financial ultimatum, as though God is in need of money. But the offering that was brought to the temple was not piled high for God to consume or God to look at or for God to hoard. Rather, the bringing of offerings to the storehouse was a means for God's vision to be made manifest in the world. The items collected were for the care of the Levites, the priests, those who didn't have personal land ownership, but it was also intended to be for those who were the poor and the marginalized, such as the orphans and the widows. And so essentially, this call to bring into the storehouse was about caring for the entire community, both those who can care for themselves and those who require assistance. And so the act of bringing it in was to ensure that everyone had enough. So that would make the worship spaces something quite unique. It would make the worship spaces this manifestation of what God intends for all people. So when God says, "You have robbed me," and when God calls the people to think about what is not in the storehouses or to come back to that, it wasn't about money and it wasn't about grain or wine or oil. Instead, it was about trust. It was about a trust that a call to a vivid imagination was something that was worthwhile. A trust that a world where God's people live out God's unchanging generosity, blessing, and flourishing was possible. And this kind of trust leans into the promise and the hope that when we trust enough to give enough, the windows of heaven will be opened and pour out a blessing so great that there will not even be enough room to take it all in. Something remarkable happens when you understand that your little, combined with the little bit from your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor, come together to ensure that there is enough for everyone. Something happens when we see that our abundance tied to the abundance of the person beside us, that our liberation tied to the person beside us, when we see our progress tied to the progress of the one beside us, that suddenly we get to picture something. We don't just bear witness to what God intends for all of us. Instead, we get to participate in God's miracle of more than enough. No one wants to, we don't like that miracle. But in order for us to live in that kind of way, we have to consider the person beside us. We have to think about the ones who are like us and the ones who are not. We have to think about those who frustrate us. We have to think about those who are strangers and those that we happily call neighbors. We must learn to trust that God is enough and that God has enough for all of us. And it's there that we come to see that God's vision of enough is made manifest when everyone participates. So that even when I don't make enough, even when I don't have enough, even when I find myself in lack, the community is already designed in such a way that it can take care of everybody, including me. And so this is God's invitation to the people. "You have robbed me" is God's invitation to return to trust that I am enough. But it is their lack of trust in God that is kind of connected to their lack of belief that God is a God of justice. That's a theme throughout the book of Malachi. That is what has brought them to rejecting the storehouses. That's what has brought them to offering bad sacrifices. All of those things come back to, they just think God isn't doing God's part. In Malachi 3:14 through 15, the people wonder, what is the point of doing good when evil rises? How many of you have asked that question? I ask it often. Yet despite all that they see that moves against the vision that God has for his people, the prophet announced, justice is not absent. Justice is unfolding. God declares that a day is coming when what is hidden will be revealed, when what is destroyed when that which destroys will lose power, when that which is broken will be healed. In essence, God invites them to trust that he is indeed the God of justice, that all things will be made right, that all things will be restored, and that their goodness and their faithfulness, their return to God, their move away from injustice is not wasted. Return to me and trust that I am the God of justice. Trust me and keep your eyes attuned to where I am looking. Your actions in step with what I am doing. Your love a mirror of my own great love. For it is there that the promise of all things being made new moves from a lament to that of hope. Return to me. I am the God of justice. I am making all things new, starting right here with you and with me. But waiting, that's difficult. It's hard to wait when hope is low. It's hard to hope when what you expect seems so far away. Believing that God has always loved you when you cannot feel it is difficult. Implementing a vivid imagination when you are surrounded by all that announces what is good enough is hard. Becoming good news in the midst of all that is not good leaves us uncertain that a return to trust, that a return to that vibrant relationship, a return to deep faith is far too difficult. We may even see it as something that is impossible. And so God speaks to a people who know that trust is a risk that we are often unwilling to take, and then offers them this picture of hope to hold on to. In Malachi 4, it says, "The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings, and you will go free, leaping with joy like calves, and the wicked will become like dust under your feet." But it's interesting that when the sun rises, it may still be cold outside, but we know that warmth is coming. As the sun rises, it's probably still a little bit dark outside, but we know that light is coming. As the sun rises, we may still not be able to see our way forward, but we know that soon the path will be made clear. As the sun rises, it offers us glimmers and glimpses of the beauty that is to come. But even as the sun is rising, it is not the sun becoming real. The sun is already in existence. The sun is already there, even when we cannot see it, even when it's in those early stages of the dawn. Things don't become real just because they are visible to us, but rather what always was, what always has been, is what we are simply being made aware of as we look out to the horizon. And so God says, God is both present and God is on the way. God announces this to a people who feel as though darkness is winning. He announces this to a people that feel that darkness has won, that the risk of trusting that the God who is unchanging will be responsive in their day and their time. And yet, as they stand in their own journey, God announces to them that while it may appear that all they are doing is waiting, that all they are doing is languishing, that all they are doing is standing still as they await God's arrival, the reality is that God is already present. And yet, as they wait, God is on the way. And what they could never understand in that moment, what they could not comprehend in that moment, is that the God who had been revealed to them through kings and through prophets, through the stories of their ancestors and the miracles that they spoke of, this God that they were so prone to mistrust and to forget, was not just announcing that healing was coming, was not just announcing that justice is on its way, but God was announcing that yes, healing is present and yes, justice is here, but the God who is your healing and the God who is justice is the God who will come and dwell among you in the flesh, in real time, face to face. God themselves is the one who will arrive. They can't see it and they can barely comprehend it, but the renewal of all things is on its way. And the earlier declaration in Malachi 3 that insists that God does not change becomes this radical revelation in light of Malachi chapter 4 that promises the Son of Righteousness will come with healing and justice, as we come to discover that the same healing and justice is found in the person, in the story, and in the way of Jesus. And the revelation is that for all that offers us a false picture, For everything that offers us a false narrative, for everything that tries to be this false equivalency and false reality about what God is like, the God who meets us face to face, this God who both is and is to come, this God who dwells among us and within us, this God is like love. This God is like healing and wholeness. This God is like welcome and invitation. This God is like justice and liberation. This God is like tables wide open. This God is like lost things being found. This God is like things that have passed away being made new and rising up. And we discover that this God who says that he is coming, this God who announces they are the Son of righteousness, is like Jesus. They can't see it, but we know it. They can't comprehend it in their day and time, but we get to be the ones to announce it. They couldn't imagine it, but we get to bear witness to it. The God we are invited to trust is the God revealed to us in Jesus Christ. And while the call to participate in a new thing seems so far and so distant, while the reminder that God so loved us feels intangible and fanciful, while the God who is good news seems so hard to find, the Jesus story, our encounter with the person and the work of Jesus, is intended to remind us to keep our eyes on the horizon, to keep our face pointed in the direction of the rising sun, to keep our eyes on the dawn, because the God revealed is both here and the God revealed is on the way with healing in his wings. Return to me and trust that I am a responsive God, a God who comes to where you are, a God who speaks in ways you will hear with a voice you will understand. And today, the greatest response to our greatest need is when we discover what God has always been speaking, that we are loved, that we are wanted, that we are so worthy, and that we are known. And that God would do anything so that we can know that we are loved and wanted and worthy and so known, even to come as one of us. The revelation of God in Jesus is God's greatest invitation for us to trust that God is enough. It's the greatest revelation that reminds us there's enough for all of us. Jesus reminds us that the God of justice is the God that we worship, and that regardless of where we find ourselves, regardless of our starting point, our perspectives, our position, or our posture, God is responsive as they announce, I am here with justice, with healing, with restoration, with forgiveness, with renewal, with love made manifest that has room for all of us. Return to me and trust that I am enough and I have enough. The worship team can come up. Return to me and trust that I am the God of justice and I will make all things new. Return to me and know that I am present and I am on the way. I, the Lord, do not change. Amen.